This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Todd Michael Gent is a retired X-ray tech, teacher, and high school football, basketball, and track coach. He's also the cousin of Peter Gent, who football fans know, wrote a book about a football team called the Dallas Cowboys. He played for them. The book was entitled North Dallas 40, and so is the movie starring Nick Nolte and Mac Davis. Todd was inspired by his cousin when he read that book back in the 60s, and now he's finally written his own entitled Hold Your Breath, Breathe.
I said, well, I can write this when I went to X-ray school to learn how to do X-rays. And so I finally did a few years ago, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. I started putting something down on paper. Then as I was writing it, I found out that might have been the best 2 years of my life. I saw how good time I had when I went to school. Of course, when I went to the X-ray school, I was about 17 years old. The thing was, the character I did in this book, for years he had hauled hay in the summers in a little bitty old town. And this particular year, after he's graduated from high school, he says, I'm going to the big city. So he goes to the big city of Dallas and wants to try to get him a job there. But he finds out he's 17 years old, it's hard to get a job like at the Sears and Montgomery Wards and Procter & Gamble's and all that. They just didn't hire people till you're at least 18. But he was in a small window, because within the next 2 months, he's got to make a decision. Either he's going to go to school or he's probably going to get drafted and go to Vietnam. So he was kind of, a young kid, didn't know what to do about his decisions, but his grandmother kept pushing him to go over to this Baylor Medical Center, the largest hospital at the time in Dallas, to see about getting a job. He thought his age would hurt him, but he gets over there and sure enough, he gets a job. He got it in housekeeping. After about 3 weeks, he gets in a service elevator, and these two pretty attractive little girls come in pushing some type of machine, and he saw they were wearing patches on their left sleeve, and he saw radiology school or something. He didn't really know what it was, but he was encouraged enough to speak to them. Normally, he wouldn't have said anything, but he said, well, what is that on y'all's sleeve? And they said, well, it's an X-ray school here. They'll teach you how to do X-rays. Well, his mind went back to about 2 months previous when a naval recruiter came through school and talked about jobs that you could get in the Navy and things they could teach you to do. And one of them was to learn how to do X-rays. He thought, well, I'm going to go see about this school. And one of the girls told him, well, you better hurry up because the new class starts in July. And this happened to be, end of May, 1st of June, that there's only a few spots left. So he did. He actually made the first decision, life-changing of his young life. And it didn't matter how old he was, since he had a high school diploma, that they accepted him into the X-ray school. And it just tells about things that he did those 2 years and how he kind of matured up. And he's kind of a little funny character, and how humor helped him get through things and just events of the time. And that was the first time he'd ever witnessed death. He didn't ever even think about anything like that. And he got the green behind his ears out pretty quick. And if he went to Vietnam, he was going to probably see death, but he sure didn't think about it being in a building. But that's how immature he was at the beginning. And then he just went on about his way.
Why the title, Hold Your Breath, Breathe?
Well, if you take a chest X-ray, they'll tell you taking a deep breath, let it out, hold it, and you shoot it. And as you walk through an X-ray department, that's all you hear. This is also in the late 60s. This is 1967. And it's in turn, that's when ultrasound was beginning to start getting used. And he was at a place that was one of the places that were trying to get that there. And so that was the beginning of that. But you hear that term the whole time as you're in an X-ray department. Okay, hold your breath, breathe. I'm pretty sure somewhere down the world you probably had some type of X-ray. That's the reason.
This is an autobiography, basically, it sounds like.
Well, it's a fiction, and some of the stuff is, it did happen. And we've been doing little book signings, and then locally around here, we've been doing some talks. I got some scheduled here and there, and we, looking to do some book fairs. And my daughter and I have a podcast, and we promote it over that thing. It's called the Coach's Report. So we do a little bit of that way, and then word of mouth, and really getting into this. I coached for 38 years, and I'm kind of doing the same type of passion about like a way I like to coach, and kind of getting in this book thing. So kind of late in life, but you ain't got nothing else to do when you're 72 years old.
Well, better late than never. Todd has also written 5 children's books with his daughter, and the 2 of them are planning to write about Todd's son who was born with cystic fibrosis. Good stuff, Todd. Thanks so much. Brother Gene was a teacher, preacher, and now he focuses on writing as a senior elder in a Mesa, Arkansas church. He's published 3 books with Paige, and the name of this book is Design. Now, listen to what happens as he starts talking about how everything in life happens for a reason. Tell me what inspired your book, Brother Gene.
I just have to give the simple answer. I believe God did. Life happens. And what I've come to realize is that it doesn't happen accidentally. And so I just, one day, several months ago, I decided to try to write it down. And it ended up being a book. Everything is by design. Every part of life is about design. When God designed us, He put together about 100 trillion cells in our bodies. A trillion is a million millions. That's a whole lot. But when He got through putting it together, we came out and we look pretty good. I think the finest example of design that I can think of, though, is the human eye. If we're driving down the street in an automobile and somehow a child runs out in front of us, there are literally millions of light waves that are flashed into our eyes immediately. Thousands and thousands of signals are sent from the human eye back to the brain. The brain then translates those things and sends responses out to muscles. And in time that cannot be measured, that which was potentially a terrible accident is avoided because of millions of things that are happening in the human eye and in the human brain and in the muscle system of the body. It's all by design. Nothing just happened. God is not hit or miss, and neither are we.
It's really amazing when you think about how the human body works. But when in your book, are you talking about how we live our lives or what happens in our lives?
The main purpose of the book is to provoke people to look and understand that nothing is accidental or by chance, and to look for God's design in everything. The reason for that is when we find the design and live by the design, our lives work. When we ignore it or refuse it or reject it, they don't work. So in the book, I have chosen maybe 4 or 5 specific areas. I talked about friendship. Friendship and acquaintance is not the same thing, but the Bible has a great deal to say about friendship. And once we find God's design for it, friendships work. They don't just fall away like they do for so many of us. There's a design for marriage. There's a design for worship. There's a design for all human relationships. It's all there in the Bible if we just look for it. But it doesn't happen by accident. Design did not come in cereal boxes. It comes in the Word of God. And as we apply that Word to life experiences, we see that it works.
All right, Brother Gene, I believe you. That thunderclap, I got to tell you, it's got me thinking. All right. Paul Brunel's been writing since he was in college, just for close family and friends in central Nebraska. They told him, you should write a book. And he remembered a religious holiday connected to a bunny that he always wondered about. So he filled in the blanks in his book, The Man Who Rode the Donkey.
Well, it's a combination here. It's the story of how the Easter Bunny came to be. And it follows the life of Christ. A little bunny is in the stable when he's born, and they meet because she jumps up on top of the manger and sees what all the fuss is all about, and he flops his hand and touches her, and from about that moment on, they have a connection, and she is there for many of the important events in his life as they become friends. She follows him really closely during the time that he is being persecuted, and she actually sees Judas exchanging the money, and she gets caught in the tomb. When they put him in the tomb, they roll the stone back across the entrance, and she gets caught in there for 3 days. And you actually find out what went on in the tomb, something I have never, ever heard or read about or anything. So it is something that if you really know anything about the Judeo-Christian religion, it's something that is highly plausible that went on there. So that's the big dig in the book is you find out what went on in the tomb, and the story even goes into how the lineage from her to today's bunnies, how it is today.
That is so creative, Paul.
Well, when I was a kid and growing up, I'm not an overly religious person. I would say I believe, but I look around and I see all the different religions, and they're actually relating to the same entity, but nobody knows how to really go about and worship that person or that entity. And it always confused me because here we were as a kid with the story of Jesus, and we're celebrating an Easter bunny. I always thought, well, how in the world did we ever get around to celebrating an Easter bunny when it's supposed to be a religious holiday? So I just sat down, and over the years I've thought about it, and there has to be a connection somewhere.
You know what? This would be great for a Sunday school class, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, the book is about 60 pages long, so it'll be a little long for one class. But I've got the book in some public libraries, and there's some in some church libraries, and there's some in the homes and stuff for drugs and rehabilitation. I've got several in places like that, and had kind of a neat happened to me first part of the month. South Central Public Power District, they supply the electricity for the area of Nebraska where I'm at, and they were celebrating their 75th anniversary, and they purchased a bunch of books and gave them away at the celebration, and I had a book signing time down there for them.
That's awesome, Paul.
It was kind of neat, and I got a kick out of it. I'm still just an old corn cob used to write it for kicks and giggles, and people kept telling me, why don't you try and publish this? Well, I wasn't writing it for that. I was just doing it because I wanted something to do, and something jumped in my head, and I wrote it down, and that's what come out.
Well, not bad, Paul. Not bad at all. Thank you so much. Carlene Martin is a retired nurse in Sigourney, Iowa, who was reminded recently by a former classmate at a high school reunion that she used to tell stories in the 3rd grade. She didn't remember that, but she did write a book based on her life. It's entitled The Doctor and the Ice Princess.
I guess it's just one of those days when I wasn't in my right mind. I was depressed because I lost my sister, and I'm from an abusive family, so I thought, maybe I should write a book about something like that. So I did. The Doctor and Ice Princess, which is Cassandra, who's the main story of it. Technically, I guess, would have been me. And I just kind of put some personal stuff into it to get it going, and it worked out pretty good. And there's some humor in it, too, of course. But it was just kind of on my personal side of life, too, and then some of it I made up. The mother found out she had cervical cancer, and she's been beaten by her husband, which would be the main character, Cassandra's dad. And she decided not to take the chemo or anything like that because she was just tired of being beaten on and everything, and she was worried about what's going to happen with her daughter, Cassandra, because she didn't want her to be there with her dad when he was an alcoholic. So she went and talked to this Dr. Miller, and she persuaded him into taking Cassandra in after she was gone. Cassandra would have been 17, and when she moved in with Dr. Miller, she was 18. So she had a chip on her shoulder and didn't care about some things and had a mouth that wouldn't quit because she told it the way it is, and if you didn't like it, that's too bad. So the doctor took her in and put her in nursing school. She graduated and she went to work with this doctor in the clinic. Well, then the doctor decided that it was time he was going to retire. So he went up to the University of Medical College and talked to his dean. And the dean found 4 med students that was getting ready to graduate. And one of them, he wanted to take his place. Well, he went back and then he found out that they had got one. And he was telling Cassandra about it. And of course, she just went livid at the time. What if he was going to tell her she's fired? And they butt heads. And she had a friend that was in elementary school that her dad wanted to came into money. And then she gave Cassandra the name the Ice Princess just because she thought she was worth something now because her dad ran into money and Cassandra wasn't her friend anymore. So they get into it. And there's hair pulling, slapping at the doctor's office. And the young man that was going to take Dr. Miller's place was there. But when the girls got into it in the office, the Dr. Miller and this Cody Grant pulled them apart. And then Cody finally said, and I thought this small town was going to be boring. So it's got a lot of humor in it and personal stuff. And at the end of the book, Dr. Miller died. She found out he wasn't going to seminars, but he had cancer. And he didn't want to leave her hanging because he wanted to make sure she was taken care of. So Cassandra found out from her friend that Dr. Miller was in the hospital, so they went there. And her and Cody were married at the doctor's bedside. And he died with a smile on his face, thinking that, his daughter was going to be taken care of.
So you've got people that you grew up with reading your book. How did they find out about it?
Oh, and we had to write something about ourselves, like a little bio, I guess you might say. And Louise, she's the one who headed up the reunion. She went out and bought the book and brought it to the reunion class. And I had to talk about it when I was there.
That was so nice of her to do that.
Yeah, and then a couple others, decided they might look into it.
So that reunion worked out for you, didn't it? In more ways than one. Thanks, Carlene. We're going to take a quick break, but we're coming right back. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books. And unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them. And they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything. Copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. While Noni Boyaz was a preschool teacher in Sycamore, Illinois, she made action games, wrote songs and poems for kids. But it was issues with her superiors that inspired her to write, with the hope of helping others, Diary of a Mad Preschool Teacher. So tell me what happened.
They just, I think they were trying to rid me of my job. I was there the longest. I was getting older. A lot of people left, and they tried in all different ways. What I did is I took notes, kind of like a diary, and then I switched the whole format into Three Witches and how they were trying to get rid of me. And instead of saying they did harassment, slander, and bullying, I said they used potions. So the book basically is how I reacted, how you stand up for yourself. And by listening to songs and words that inspire and strengthen you, such as I won't back down, those things helped me so much to keep me going in the classroom, out of the classroom, just changed my whole attitude. The one boss, the middle witch, she came into the classroom at the end of the day, and then we had parent-teacher conferences afterwards, and I was telling her about something, and she walked right past me and gave me kind of like a backhand. like, I'm not listening to you. So, okay, that wasn't so bad. But then right before the parents were coming in, she called me and started screaming. You don't know what you're doing. You're doing this wrong. You shouldn't be doing this, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my gosh, another teacher grabbed the phone and she was still screaming. And she said, stop. This isn't Noni. And she said, oh, put her back on the phone. So I got back on the phone and she goes, oh, you do a wonderful job. I mean, how do you deal with someone that 1 minute they're screaming at you and the next minute they say you're fine? Sometimes the songs itself would just wrap up everything. You got to be bad. You got to be strong. You got to be wiser. You got to be cool. You got to be calm. You got to get yourself together. And that encouraged me to keep going and maybe stronger, maybe a better person than music, honestly. And it ties up every chapter. So whatever happens in that chapter, you kind of have to laugh because some of the music a lot of people would know. Some people might not know, but if you looked it up and you saw the whole song, you'd understand exactly where it was coming from. So the middle boss witch, she would stir that pot and then put a twist to everything you did. I was getting a pension from them. There weren't that many people that were getting a pension. She'd constantly bring that up to me. So instead of getting upset, I wanted to stay a little longer to build up my pension. So I thought to myself, I can conquer this. I can do this. And with the help of the music, and then there's some sayings, of course, that my mom drilled in our heads that it just kept me going. As far as the classroom was a refuge. When you're with children, it is the most magical place on earth. And I did it 29 and a half years. I loved it. And it was a wonderful job. It just, out of the 29 and a half years, 3 of them were tough because they were just trying to get rid of me, but they didn't have enough ammunition to do it. So I got raises every year. So you explain that to me. I have no idea.
So at the end of the book, do you leave?
Each one of them left before me, so I was still standing. And that's the Elton John song, I'm Still Standing. And it just really, I think, was a goal of mine that I can outlive them as far as with this job. I can withstand things with this job because the kids were the most important thing. And so the question of the book was mainly, can good overcome evil? I say, yes, it definitely can.
Yeah, and what goes around comes around, right? Thanks, Noni. R.M. Burgess is a business professor in Philadelphia and no stranger to academic writing, but it was a story that he heard growing up that stayed with him, that inspired him to write Lily of Red Hills.
I did my high school undergrad in India, and the whole idea of the extended families, and there tend to be, relatives from the wrong side of the sheets, as it were. There was this story of a girl from in the village and so on that sort of very roughly corresponded to the story I wrote at the end. It's about a girl called Lily. She's a product of back in those days, 40 or 50 years ago, for widespread birth control. Accidents happened, and she's a product of one of those, of a very, very mismatched couple, an aristocrat and a high class call girl. And so she's kind of torn between 2 worlds and kind of provides some dramatic impetus to the story. Her mother is diagnosed with terminal illness and has tried to bring up her daughter to be different, to sheltered her from the rough world that she lived in. And when she realized that she wasn't going to live much longer, she thought that the only hope for her daughter was with her father's family that had rejected her anyway. So she sends her there, and that's kind of the basis for the story of the young girl arriving in a grand estate where she's got ties of blood, but is obviously very unwelcome initially.
So her mother was a prostitute, and do the people that were controlling her mother come after her daughter?
Later, yeah. I mean, they do want to use her. And that's sort of one of the reasons why her mother tells her to run away, and she escapes. And of course, the story goes on with her not being unwelcome in this estate and sort of finding ultimately favor with some. Again, there's sort of a backdrop to the story of elder care, as it were, because her granduncle that she meets at the estate is all alone, and there's kind of the struggle that many of us face with aging parents of, his children are away in the city, and he's all alone, and then all of a sudden this girl arrives who out of the blue, and they form a bond, which is of course very, very frowned upon by his children, who see her as a threat, an interloper, and want nothing to do with her, want her to kick her out. So that's sort of how she is thrown out again, and sort of ends up being into the clutches of her mother's handlers. I guess the bottom line is self-interest. I mean, we're all self-interested, and even though we do have love and caring for many other people, there are bounds and limits, and there's the happenstance of who we eventually end up depending on. So the old granduncle that Lily takes care of, I mean, his children, of course, love him. It's not like they don't like him or anything. They don't love him or anything, but they have their own careers and far away, and he's very stubborn about not wanting to sell the estate and moving and making it convenient for them. And so, all of us, even though we have love and bonds, filial affection and so on, there are limits. External eye, something might appear very selfish, but you can't really call somebody selfish until you walk in their shoes.
So true, R.M. Burgess. We are so quick to judge. All right, that's a wrap for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. Thank you, authors. Thank you, sleep-deprived listeners, for actually being here right now. I mean, that's amazing. And if you're listening on download, we love that too. You can do that, by going to 710WOR.com. You go to podcasts, and there we are, along with all the other shows we have right here on this station. Len Berman and Michael Riedel in the morning. They're my favorite because they send me out on the streets. You can't believe what they do to me. Check us out, 6 to 10 a.m., Monday through Friday, right here on 710 WOR. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. I'll catch you next time.